I'm thrilled to be joined by Joy Reid, someone I've had the honor of knowing for quite a long time and have just tremendous amount of admiration for. So, Joy, I guess I wanted to start just by asking just kind of a general question. I think a lot of people who see you and other people on TV just wonder a little bit about what that experience is like to be an on air television host, how you went through the process of thinking about getting this huge megaphone. Like, how do you decide what you want to talk about and how you want to think through politics when you have, millions of people watching you every night?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you, Peter. It's always great to be with you, virtually or in person. So it's
Mhm.
great to see you. I think the thing is that there's nothing that's not surreal about being on television. I think you would agree. It's just, normally I would be complaining into my Twitter feed back in the day or chatting with my husband or friends or on a group chat, but you're doing that same sort of process of working through what's happening in the world in front of millions of people. And you have a huge responsibility in doing that, but you also have a huge opportunity because most people really can only hope to influence the people in their small circle. You have the potential to say something that will move a lot of people. So it's a huge responsibility. As far as the shows that I've done, it's a real group process. On the last show I did, and even on my weekend show on AM Joy, we always do this group meeting with all of the team, and we all just talk about what's bothering us, enraging us, making us curious, making us interested. We all just kind of talk through. I used to call it my 11 o'clock therapy session, and we'd be on there. It was supposed to be like a 20-minute call, but it'd be like an hour-long call where we're all saying, I cannot believe this is happening or that is happening. And here are some of the stories we're all focused on. And we all kind of think about it. And then myself and my senior producer and my executive producer would have to take all that we heard and all that we said and just distill it down and just make a choice. And it's one of those things where we have an hour, which is really 40 minutes in TV because of all the commercials. And you just have to figure out we can't do everything. We can't say everything. So we just have to pick what we think is the most important four things that we can talk about on a given night, if we're lucky, five.
Right. So there's the question of who you are and what you believe and what you think is important. I'm curious about what kind of pressures come when you are the host of a show like that. Obviously, I imagine there people are looking at what the ratings are. So there are commercial pressures. Are there ideological pressures in various ways? And if so, how do these things express themselves?
It's interesting because there obviously, yes, the ratings pressure is big, and the bosses watch what rates and what doesn't, and we watch what rates and what doesn't. Right, keeping the show on the air is a matter of performing well. I was lucky enough that my weekend show was literally the highest rated thing they'd ever had on a weekend, so we had total free reign. And Phil Griffin was just like, if you're rating, you can do whatever you can kind of do what you want. We never had interference from him or from management. I think he probably felt a lot of pressure because he had to answer to the people in Comcast and above him and Andy Lack and all those people who would scream and yell about allegedly about things that we were doing on MSNBC because they're just not liberals. You know what I mean? We're liberals and a lot of the people at the top are not. So they may not agree ideologically, but a great leader, a great boss does not let that filter down to us. They don't really hit us with it. The two times in my career where there's been a lot of real pressure that you could feel and that you could actually see were the Iraq War. And I was very low level. I was a digital editor, and the pressure was palpable. You could see that the company, the business, not just our company, but all of the media business did not want you criticizing the war, did not want to hear critical coverage of the war, and did not want to hear any impediments to the war. And actually drove me out of the news business. I actually ended up leaving because there was a jingoism that was just palpable and a pressure. I remember we got a memo one time that came from wherever higher up that said we're not to be disrespectful of the president. And I'm like, what does that even mean? Does that mean we can't question what he's doing? Like, it just didn't make sense to me at all. And the other time that I would say that I felt that incredible pressure was really around Gaza. I mean, after October 7th, that October 7th attack, a lot shifted. And I think not just for me, but for everyone that even had ever covered the Middle East in any way, suddenly you really felt an enormous pressure, like a weighty pressure on that issue that it was not desirable. There were some viewers who really didn't want to hear it. There were some people on social media who would get very angry about it. But then you even felt like a corporate pressure about it too. In some sense, I would say the same thing could be true a little bit about Elon Musk. There was like a lot of reticence to deal with him or with big corporate entities and big wealthy entities in a certain way, but never anything like Iraq War and Gaza.
Hmm. With the Gaza thing, why do you think, just at like a very basic level, were the ratings not good in terms of talking about Gaza in certain ways? Or if it wasn't the ratings, what do you think would be the reason that there was pressure? And how would you describe what the pressure was to do or not to do?
Right. And this is the other thing too, is that, I used to say to my team that ratings are really important. Obviously, they're part of the longevity of doing a show, but you also have to make choices about what you think is important, regardless of the ratings. The thing that does not rate on American cable TV is international news. Not just Gaza, but any international news. If you start talking about a country that's not the United States, or for
Mm,
a period of time, if you started talking about anything that wasn't literally about Donald Trump,
mm, mm,
particularly a liberal audience, like a liberal audience that watches MSNBC, they would say in focus groups, too much Trump, they don't want to hear it. But you
mm,
see in the numbers that all they wanted to hear about was Donald Trump.
mm,
And they
mm, mm,
just kept talking about Donald Trump. That's what would rate. The
mm,
minute you would talk about the BRICS nations, which I'm obsessed with that issue about BRICS,
mm, mm,
would not rate. If the
mm,
minute you talk about, I mean, Ukraine was sort of an exception. It did rate, but I think it was because people saw those people and related to them, right? That they saw what was
mm,
happening to people in
mm,
Ukraine and they
mm,
looked to them roughly like what America, and they could sort of relate to them. So that did rate for
mm,
CNN
mm,
and for
mm,
us. But
mm.
generally, international news does not. You start talking about China and what's happening there and their economic, does not rate, does not rate. The Middle East does not rate. And so at a certain point, we were making a choice to cover the Gaza conflict irrespective of the ratings, because to me, it felt like a moral catastrophe that could not be ignored. And so that was a choice we were making to say, we're going to do the things that are the most important in the news, just like we would normally do, but we were going to carve out time to talk about this thing because to me, it felt like some things are more important than ratings.
Right. So even after October 7th, right at the beginning, ratings for focusing on Israel and Palestine weren't high.
No.
Hmm. So do you think that was the pressure that to focus on the subject less, or was the pressure to focus on a subject in a different way?
I think it was the latter. I think that there was just a real deep discomfort with covering this conflict
Hmm.
at all, unless it was being covered in much the way that the American media covered the Iraq War, which is that the US had a total right to go in and bomb the hell out of Iraq and obliterate Baghdad. And it didn't matter that it didn't line up with the actual facts of what happened on 9/11. It didn't matter that there was actually no proof that Saddam Hussein had anything to do with 9/11. It didn't matter if you countered that narrative that the United States was the just party in going after Iraq and that you sort of made that intellectual, meander and you just figured out how to do it or just ignored it, then you were in the wrong. It didn't matter, right? What the facts were. And I think in this case, I think there just is a deep discomfort with covering this conflict because you have to cover a country that's a very good friend of the United States, that a lot of people in the United States love and respect and root for. And you're saying they're doing things that are violating international law. You're saying that they're not the only victim here, that they're
Mhm.
also in some ways perpetrating
Right.
wrongs. And so when you're saying that, there's a deep discomfort with it. And I think people get really angry about
Mm,
it in the same way
mm.
people got really angry about the way some people chose to, I think, accurately cover Iraq.
Right. And you're saying that that anger gets expressed both externally and internally within the corporation or a network.
I think so. I think you feel that there's certain that people are uncomfortable with the coverage and
Mm,
feel that the coverage really ought to be one way. And if you're not covering it that way, that you're doing it wrong. I mean, people will complain. You'll have people really angry. You'll have, and it isn't like it's hard to describe what happens. No one orders you to not do things. One of the
mm,
things people sort of assume is that management sort of bears down on you, tells you what to do. That's not necessarily true. But I think that there are ways that corporate America expresses a view, and a view that is, this is not an area we want to go in, and this is not a kind of coverage we want to see. And you definitely know it when it's happening.
This has been a free preview of my weekly conversation. If you'd like to hear the rest and support my work, please consider subscribing at peterbeinart.substack.com.